Welcome back to The Empowered, the space where we dive into the messy, beautiful, and transformative parts of being human. I'm your host, Alkistis, and today I want to talk to you about something that's not easy, but it's so necessary. We're talking about self-forgiveness. Let me ask you something. Have you ever looked back at a decision you made, something you said or didn't say, something you did or didn't do, and felt like a deep sense of regret? Like, why did I do that? Why wasn't I better? I know that feeling because I've carried it too. And for years, I thought holding on to that guilt was the right thing to do, like it was a punishment I deserved. But here's what I've learned. Holding on to guilt doesn't make you a better person. It just keeps you stuck in the past. So today, I want to unpack this with you. Not from the perspective of having it all figured out, but from the perspective of someone who's still learning, still growing, and still practicing the art of self-forgiveness. This isn't about fixing yourself because you're not broken. It's about freeing yourself. So, with no further ado, let's dive in. For a very long time, I didn't even realize how hard I was on myself. I thought the guilt I felt was normal. I thought it was what I deserved. Growing up, I was taught that when you mess up, you fix it, and then you move on. But no one ever told me how to move on when the person you're angry is yourself. The truth is, forgiving ourselves is harder than forgiving others. Why? Because we know all the details of our mistakes. We know our intentions, our fears, our weaknesses, and sometimes we judge ourselves for not being stronger, smarter, or kinder. There's this quote by Gabor Mate that always hits me hard. The greatest damage done to us is not the things that happen to us, but the way we learn to see ourselves because of those things. I grew up believing that I had to earn my worth through perfection. If I didn't get it right, I didn't feel like enough. And even now, that voice creeps in sometimes, telling me I should have done better, been better. But here's what I've realized. Guilt and shame don't heal us. They don't make us better. They just keep us stuck in a loop where we feel like we have to keep providing ourselves, proving we're worthy of love, forgiveness, and grace. And the truth is, we already are. I want to share with you a moment when I realized I couldn't keep carrying the weight of my own guilt anymore. It wasn't tied to a single event, but to a pattern that I had shaped for so much of my life. It was a moment when I decided to cut cords with people who didn't make me feel big, but always made me feel small. Every time I said yes to them, I was saying no to myself. Every time I stayed silent when I wanted to speak up, I was betraying my own voice. And one day, it just became too clear. I felt this overwhelming sense of clarity, like a voice deep inside me was saying, "You can no longer stay in silence. This is not who you are meant to be." But that voice didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was showing up in my body long before I was ready to listen. I started experiencing physical symptoms, psychosomatic pain, that made it impossible to ignore how much I was holding inside. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. I thought, maybe it's stress. Maybe I just need to rest. But the truth was, my body was speaking the words I wasn't ready to say. That's when I discovered somatic healing and homeopathy. It was a turning point. Through these practices, I began to connect my physical symptoms to the emotional weight I was carrying: guilt, resentment, fear, and exhaustion of constantly putting others before myself. There's a quote by Meryl Streep, a woman who has won multiple Oscars and is now in her 70s, that resonates so deeply with me. She said, "It took me years to understand that if someone doesn't seek me, see me, or listen to me, they don't deserve to have a place in my life." Those words became a mantra for me. They gave me permission to let go of people and relationships that weren't serving me. And let me tell you, it wasn't easy. Letting go came with its own wave of guilt. I questioned myself constantly. Am I being selfish? Am I being unkind? But here's what I've realized. We are so deeply conditioned to put others first that we forget to take care of ourselves. For the longest time, I was saying yes to invitations I didn't want, to conversations that drained me, to relationships that didn't nurture me. And every yes to those things was a no to myself. When I finally started saying no, when I began to protect my energy and prioritize my own well-being, it was like planting seeds. At first, it felt quiet, even lonely. But over time, those seeds started to grow. They became seeds of freedom. The guilt began to fade, and in its place, I felt a sense of lightness and possibility. I realized that forgiveness isn't just about the past. It's about creating a future that aligns with who you are and what you need. By letting go of people and patterns that made me feel small, I was finally able to create space for growth, for healing, and for joy. Forgiveness is freedom, not just from others, but from the ways we betray ourselves. And when you choose to forgive yourself, when you choose to let go of the guilt and start honoring your needs, you give yourself the permission to live fully, wholeheartedly, and authentically. That is the power of forgiveness. It's not just a release, it's a rebirth. After letting go of the guilt and realizing the relationships and patterns that no longer served me, I realized something profound. Forgiveness wasn't just about what I let go of. It was also about what I choose to protect moving forward. That's where boundaries came in. Boundaries became the framework for my self-forgiveness. They weren't about shutting people out or building walls. They were about creating space for myself to grow, heal, and thrive. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to what others needed. I was deciding what I needed. And that changed everything. Let's talk about boundaries, something we often associate with keeping others out. But really, boundaries are about protecting what matters most: your energy, your growth, and your peace. Have you ever felt drained by saying yes to something you didn't want to go? Or stuck in a cycle of overcommitting to people who don't fully respect your time, energy, or emotions? What if I told you that every time you say yes to something that doesn't serve you, you're saying no to yourself? In this chapter, we're exploring how boundaries play a crucial role in self-forgiveness. They aren't just about creating distance from others. They're about reclaiming space for your own needs and priorities. By the end of this, I want you to think about where in your life you need stronger boundaries and how setting them can help you heal and grow. Think about the relationships in your life right now. Are there people who leave you feeling drained, unheard, or even unimportant? Are there situations where you're constantly giving more than you're receiving? What does that feel like? Exhausting, right? Boundaries aren't selfish. They're a way of honoring yourself. When you forgive yourself, you're making a commitment to move forward, not repeat old patterns. Boundaries are how you ensure that commitment. Consider this: who or what in your life feels like it's pulling you away from your goals, your happiness, and your peace. Many of us have been conditioned to believe that saying no is unkind or selfish. But every yes to something you don't want is a no to something that you need. Ask yourself, when was the last time I said yes out of obligation, even though it didn't feel right? How did that make me feel afterward? Setting boundaries often brings us feelings of guilt, especially if you're someone who's always put others first. It might feel like you're letting people down. But reflect, who in your life makes you feel guilty when you set boundaries? How often do you prioritize their feelings over your own well-being? How did these people react when you set the boundaries? Without boundaries, we end up in cycles of resentment, burnout, and even physical symptoms like stress or exhaustion. Your body knows when your boundaries are being crossed, even if your mind tries to ignore it. Although boundaries may feel restrictive at first, they're actually liberating. They give you the power to decide how you want to spend your time, energy, and emotional resources. Imagine a version of your life where you only said yes to the things that truly aligned with your needs and values. What would that look like? How would it feel? Let's get into how to actually start building boundaries in a way that feels supportive and healing. Not harsh, not cold, but something that aligns with who you are and where you're going. Now, I know boundaries can feel uncomfortable, especially if you're not used to setting them. It's like flexing a muscle you've never worked before. It's awkward and it might feel a little sore afterward. But the more you practice, the stronger that muscle becomes. And trust me, it's so worth it. So let's talk about the steps you can take to build boundaries that truly honor you. Before you start setting a boundary, you've got to know why you're setting it. So take a moment and think, what's draining me right now? Who or what leaves me feeling depleted or frustrated? Sometimes it's as simple as noticing how you feel after spending time with certain people or say yes to things you don't actually want to do. Pay attention to those moments. They're telling you where a boundary is needed. Here's a little exercise you can try. Grab a journal and write down one thing in your life that feels heavy or overwhelming right now. Then ask yourself, what would it look like to protect my energy in this situation? Sometimes just getting it out on paper helps you see more clearly. Setting boundaries is one thing, but communicating them, that's where the real work begins. The key is to be clear, calm, and confident. No need to over-explain or justify yourself. Here are some examples of how you can express your boundaries in every situation. I understand you have your opinion, but my decision is personal. This is a kind but firm way to acknowledge someone else's perspective while standing by your own choice. Then you can say, I appreciate your concern, but this is something I want to handle my own way. That's like a gentle reminder that you're taking responsibility for your decisions and don't need outside interference. Another one could be, I don't feel the need to explain my position further. Sometimes less is more. This sets a boundary without leaving room for negotiation. Another way to create boundaries could be, I trust my judgment and I'm confident in my choice. Great way to reinforce your self-trust and let others know your decision is final. And last one, the way you're speaking to me right now isn't acceptable. If it continues, I'll need to step away. This establishes both a boundary and a consequence, making it clear you won't tolerate disrespect. I know this can feel uncomfortable at first, so I've created a free cheat sheet with even more examples you can use in different situations. Think of it as your quick reference guide whenever you need a little help finding the words. Practice these phrases daily because, as we've said, setting boundaries is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. You can download your cheat sheet in the show notes down below. Trust me, I know it's very hard to say no, especially if you're used to being a people pleaser. But here's something to remember. Your boundary isn't about hurting anyone, it's about protecting yourself. Let's be honest, setting boundaries isn't always met with applause. In fact, some people won't like it when you start prioritizing yourself, especially if they've benefited from your lack of boundaries in the past. This is where pushback comes in, and it's something you need to be ready for. Pushback usually isn't about you, it's about the other person's discomfort. When someone reacts negatively to your boundaries, it's often because they're used to you saying yes, according to their needs and putting their comfort first. Your boundary disturbs that dynamic, and that can feel unsettling for them. For example, a friend might say, "You've changed," just because you're not always available at their convenience. Or someone at work might accuse you of being uncooperative if you stop taking that extra tasks that were never your responsibility. Or a family member might guilt trip you, "You're so selfish, what's happened to you?" The truth is, their reaction is not a reflection of the validity of your boundary. It's a reflection of their inability to adapt to it. When someone pushes you back, it's easy to second guess yourself or feel guilty. And believe me, I know that feeling very well. Take a deep breath and remind yourself why you set this boundary in the first place. Your boundary is about protecting your energy and your peace. It's not about pleasing others. If someone challenges your boundary, calmly restate it. You don't need to explain or justify your decision. For example, if they say, "But don't you care about the family and do it for them," or whatever, you can respond with, "I've already explained my decision. I hope you can respect it." Sometimes pushback comes in the form of guilt tripping or emotional manipulation. It's important to recognize this for what it is. If someone says you're being selfish, you might respond with, "I understand that this is hard for you, but I need to prioritize what's best for me." Setting boundaries might create temporary discomfort in your relationships, but it also creates long-term respect and clarity. Not everyone will understand your boundaries, and that's okay. The people who truly value you will respect your decision, even if they don't fully agree with them. Remember, a boundary isn't a negotiation. It's a statement of what you need. Apologizing, over-explaining can weaken your position and leave room for others to push back further. Instead, keep your tone calm and confident. When facing resistance, it's important to keep reinforcing your self-worth. Try repeating these affirmations. I am not responsible for managing other people's feelings. It's okay if someone doesn't agree with my decisions. Setting boundaries is an act of self-respect. I don't have to explain or justify my needs to anyone. Take a moment to think about where you've experienced pushback in the past. Maybe it was a friend who didn't respect your time, a family member who pushed your limits, or even a coworker who tried to guilt you for not taking on more. How did you handle it? Now imagine how it would feel to stand firm in your boundaries, knowing you're prioritizing your well-being over someone else's expectations. That's the power of being prepared for pushbacks. It allows you to hold your ground with confidence and grace. Boundaries aren't just about what you say. They're about what you're willing to hold. Pushback might come, but when you're clear of your intentions and commitment to honoring yourself, no amount of resistance can shake your resolve. Remember, your boundaries are worth protecting because you are worth of protection. Let's be honest, there's nothing more challenging than standing firm in your boundaries when someone is actively trying to manipulate you, especially when that manipulation is rooted in beliefs they hold so tightly. It could be a family member, a close friend, or even a partner saying, "This is what's right and you're wrong," or "If you cared about me, you'd do this." Manipulation can make you question yourself. It can make you feel like you're the bad person, like you're failing to live up to someone else's expectations. And worst of all, it can plant seeds of guilt that are so hard to shake. But here's the thing. You're allowed to have boundaries. You're allowed to choose yourself, even when others don't agree. And most importantly, you're allowed to forgive yourself for not meeting someone else's unrealistic expectations. And here's why manipulation makes self-forgiveness so hard. The power of beliefs. Sometimes people manipulate you not just because they want to hurt you, but because they're holding on to beliefs that they think are the only right way to live. For example, a parent might say, "Family comes first always," as a way to guilt you into doing what they want. Or a friend might say, "Real friends wouldn't act this way." Their beliefs feel so strong that it's easy to question your own. You start wondering, am I wrong? Am I selfish? But here's the thing, they're using guilt as a weapon. Manipulation thrives on guilt. It's the subtle or not so subtle way to make people feel responsible for their emotions. If you've ever felt that pang of guilt after standing up for yourself, you know how heavy that can feel. It makes self-forgiveness harder because you start believing their narrative instead of your truth. But let's be real. When you're setting boundaries with someone who manipulates, there's always that underlying fear of losing the relationship. And because you don't want to be seen as the bad person, you might hold on to the guilt instead of letting it go. You might think, if I feel guilty, at least it shows I care. But guilt isn't proof of love. It's proof that their manipulation is working. So how can you free yourself from that guilt? When someone manipulates you, it says more about them than it does about you. It's often a reflection of their fear, insecurity, or need for control, not for your worth or actions. So ask yourself, if I strip away their words, what is the actual truth here? What do I feel is right for me? It's so important to stand firm in your values. Your values are your anchor. When you're clear about what matters to you, whether it's protecting your time, your peace, or your well-being, you can return to those values when manipulation starts to creep in. For example, if your value is self-care, remind yourself saying no to this request isn't selfish. It's about honoring my value and taking care of myself, my family, my energy, everything. Release the responsibility for other actions. You are not responsible for how someone feels about your boundaries. Repeat this to yourself. I cannot control their reaction. I can only control my response. Yes, they might be upset. Yes, they might guilt trip you. But their reaction is not a reaction of whether your boundary is valid. Practice self-forgiveness as a daily ritual. Forgiving yourself doesn't happen in a single moment. It's a practice. Every day remind yourself, I'm allowed to prioritize my needs. I'm not responsible for fixing or pleasing others. Write down one thing you feel guilty about. Then write a compassionate response to yourself as if you're talking to a dear friend. Guilt is not always bad. It can show us where we're growing. Instead of seeing guilt as a proof you've done something wrong, try seeing it as a signal that you're stepping outside old patterns. Ask yourself, is this guilt telling me I've done something wrong? Or is it showing me that I'm breaking free from someone else's expectations? Saying no is hard, I know. It feels like such a small word, but it carries so much weight. But let me tell you, saying no is one of the most powerful things you can do for yourself. Start small. You don't have to overhaul your life overnight. But maybe it's saying no for a social event you don't really want to attend, or declining a favor you know that will drain you. Here's a little tip. Instead of saying, I can't, try saying, I'm not available. It's a subtle shift, but it sounds more confident and leaves less room for negotiation. And here's the truth. Every time you say no to something that doesn't align with you, you're saying yes to something that does. So what's one thing you can say no to this week? Think about it. One thing that is also very good is to celebrate small wins. I cannot stress this enough. Celebrate every boundary you set, no matter how small, because setting boundaries isn't about just the result. It's about the courage it takes to honor yourself. Did you say no to something you didn't want to do? Celebrate that. Did you speak up when you normally would stay quiet? Celebrate that. I want you to take a moment and really feel proud of yourself for every step you take, because each boundary you set is a reminder to yourself and to the world that you matter. Your energy matters. Your peace matters. And that's something worth celebrating. Boundaries aren't easy, but they are life-changing. They're not about shutting people out. They're about inviting yourself in. And remember, every boundary you set is a seed you're planting for a healthier, more peaceful future. So keep planting those seeds and watch how your life starts to change. But here's the bigger picture. Forgiveness is freedom. You're not just forgiving yourself for saying no or setting boundaries. You're forgiving yourself from the years you spent trying to meet someone else's needs at the expense of your own. That's a lot to carry. But letting go is one of the most liberating things you'll ever do. When you forgive yourself, you're reclaiming your story. You're saying, I don't need to live under someone else's rules, beliefs, or manipulations. I trust myself. I trust my values, and I trust that I'm enough. So the next time someone tries to manipulate you with guilt of their own version of what's right, take a deep breath and remind yourself, my worth is not tied to their beliefs. My choices are valid, even if they don't understand them. Now I want you to take a moment to think about this. Is there someone in your life whose beliefs or expectations are making you question your boundaries? What would it feel like to release the guilt and stand firm in what you know is right for you? Forgiving yourself isn't about forgetting. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of guilt and choosing a life that aligns with your truth. You deserve that freedom. As we wrap up this conversation, I want to leave you with a simple truth. You're allowed to choose yourself. It doesn't make you selfish, unkind, or unloving. It makes you human. Standing firm in your boundaries, even in the face of manipulation, is an act of courage. And forgiving yourself for the guilt that comes with it is an act of self-love. Remember, you're not here to live up to someone else's expectations or carry the weight of their beliefs. You're here to honor your journey. So the next time guilt starts to creep in, pause and remind yourself, my worth isn't tied to anyone else's approval. I'm enough just as I am. Thank you so much for being here, for showing up for yourself, and for giving yourself the space to grow. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear this message. And if you're ready to dive deeper into these topics, subscribe, leave a comment, or connect with me. I love hearing your stories. Until next time, be kind to yourself, stand firm in your truth, and keep choosing the freedom that comes with self-forgiveness. You've got this. And always remember, take care of you.